Welcome to our Week 4 lecture. This week's topic is differential and dynamic pricing. So, we're here. We've made it to the buzzword everyone's been wanting to talk about, dynamic pricing. Before we get any further, let's lay out some definitions. Differential pricing is selling the same or very similar products to different customers at different prices. It's described in a much more limited way than this in the book. More on that in a few minutes. Dynamic pricing is the practice of adjusting prices in real time in response to changes in demand or supply, or due to market realities that impact those factors. Truthfully, 80% of your focus, time, energy, and return is going to be oriented around differential pricing. Dynamic pricing is a great way to take advantage of changing factors in the moment, but it is by definition a reactive strategy. Whereas differential pricing allows you to plan ahead for any number of circumstances, oriented mostly around something we know very well, our product and our customers. A quick note before we dive in today. Most of the lectures in this course are built so that you can either watch them before, after, or alongside your weekly reading. This week, I would strongly recommend that you stop here if you haven't yet done your reading and dive into the 1% windfall before watching the rest of this lecture, as it will rely heavily on a set of definitions and concepts laid out in the book. Rafi Mohammed's 1% windfall describes a number of innovative strategies, many of which will help you expand your knowledge of pricing both within and beyond the nonprofit arts and culture sector. The highest impact strategies from the book for the arts specifically will be the ones we discuss in the lecture today. And Mohammed describes them with a great deal of clarity, with lots of really interesting examples. So there's no need for you to get it all, both from the reading and the lecture. So consider yourself warned from this point out if you haven't completed this week's reading. The first, and perhaps the most fun chapter of the reading, is about pickup plans. This concept, though it has a silly name, can have a high impact on our returns. The idea behind a pickup plan is that there may be an untapped customer base who won't, can't, or doesn't want to buy our product the way it's currently priced, and that these customers would buy if we offered a more clever alternative around either the price or the use of our product. Now remember back to the Bernstein reading you did in week 1. Generally, the reason why potential patrons don't attend the arts is lack of interest or awareness, not lack of access via price. So, Mohammed's assumption that customers just need a nudge around pricing may not entirely apply to arts and culture. As such, most of these pickup plan strategies are generally more useful for other types of products. That doesn't mean there isn't more experimentation to do here for our sector, but for many of these practices it would be just that, experimentation. However, there are a few that have use in arts and culture sector, so let's explore. Ownership alternatives are the first pickup plan laid out in the 1% windfall. Generally, these are most applicable in situations where the purchase of a product means ownership, whether it's software or a physical product. It's not entirely useful for the arts. The purchase of a ticket doesn't mean that you own a performance or exhibit. Although there are some presenting organizations that have seat licenses, where an individual pays a fee on top of the price of their subscription to hold on to a given seat for all events at that venue. But other than that, there aren't really many useful examples of ownership alternatives in the arts. Sometimes a product has an uncertain value. Maybe it's new to the market, or factors about the product's viability are in flux. However, this is rarely true about live entertainment. What you see is generally what you get. There are some organizations that offer money-back guarantees for their subscriptions, which can help reinsure prospective patrons about the investment in a subscription. We'll talk about more methods to help mitigate that in a moment. But generally, our patrons know exactly what they're signing up for, and there's little flux about the value of our product. Price certainty is the one group of pickup plans that has a wide appeal and use in our sector, especially as the prices for live entertainment outside the nonprofit sector gain fame and notoriety for their fluctuations. The price certainty of a subscription can be a very compelling message. For example, take a look at this screen cap of an email from Des Moines Performing Arts that went out to their subscribers during the holidays. Each package holder got a personalized email that detailed the savings they received compared to the average single show ticket buyer. For this subscriber, in the premium price zone, they saved more than $250 only halfway through the year. So, when it comes time to renew their package, the subscriber will likely have a big number in red flashing lights, reminding them of the value and savings of signing up for another year of price certainty via subscription. Many organizations offer membership schemes that give patrons incentive to pay a fee that will give them deeper access to the organization. In most, though not all cases in the US, when a membership is offered by a nonprofit arts organization, it's aligned to the way that Mohammed describes the all-you-can-eat model. You pay a large annual fee that, similar to a subscription, gives you access to see as many shows at an organization as you'd like. In the UK, it's typically more along the lines of Mohammed's high-low pricing model. A member to a theater will pay one annual fee that guarantees them low prices and discounts to shows throughout the year. Both structures have their merits, especially in situations where demand and supply are volatile and hard to predict. Finally, Mohammed outlines many pickup plans that help sway customers that have constraints, financial or otherwise. Like ownership alternatives, this is traditionally more useful when a product is physically owned by the customer. However, it's also useful in the case that a large upfront investment is being made in a product. Again, in the case of subscription, we may be asking a patron to shell out hundreds of dollars all at once. As long as the organization doesn't need that cash right away in order to remain liquid, it makes a lot of sense to help the customer defray that large investment in their mind by offering payment plans, either over the course of a few months, or even some organizations that allow monthly payments. This can help with the value price messaging as well. For example, see all shows this year for as low as $20 a month. Versioning is another very interesting concept that Mohammed introduces. The key idea here is balanced on the intersection of price and offering. We're not only playing with price or how a patron pays, we're also altering the product they're being offered. Maybe it's what's on stage, but more often it's the elements of their experience that are in our control. We'll talk about more examples of what that means in a minute. Out of the three main strategies the reading covers, versioning is the one with the most meat on its bones for our purposes. However, the main caution I'd extend here is that the more versions we're offering, the more carefully we need to communicate. Think back to the JAM study. It's not to say that we shouldn't be offering the right set of versions. It's that we should be thinking very carefully about the right axes to be defining those versions that has the highest impact on unit and revenue growth. When it comes to versioning, there are so many different ways in which it applies to the arts. Especially as it relates to premium versions, we've already seen how small value adds can persuade patrons to spend a lot more on tickets. Just a few of the ways in which the 1% windfall defines these value adds are already built into the scale of house models. The highest demand, usually closest seats, are priced the highest. Guaranteed access to programming can be a great incentive to subscribe, or pay a higher price, as can priority access. Pretty much any time a symphony orchestra has the luck to land a performance with Yo-Yo Ma, they can leverage such an event into increased subscriptions, donations, and memberships from patrons who are eager to either guarantee access or get priority access to see a living legend perform. We can also strip our product down to expand the patron base at lower prices. Generally, this means offering a lower quality. Again, built into our scale plan, the lowest demand seats should be our entry-level price. Sometimes, organizations will experiment with off-peak pricing. However, as Mohammed writes, off-peak prices should either be targeted at customers who would not come at all, or be used to cover fixed costs during low-demand times. This is most applicable in the museum space, where the biggest cost is keeping the doors open throughout the week. As it relates to off-peak pricing, remember back to the art and theater case from week 3 as an example of how, counterintuitively, off-peak pricing can actually cause more problems than it solves. Versioning can also be used to serve unique customer needs. The first example Rafi Mohammed describes here is a monthly club. An example of an arts organization who tried this method out is a contemporary theater, or ACT, in Seattle, Washington. They created a membership scheme called the ACT Pass. For a fixed monthly price, you could buy access to attend an unlimited number of shows at ACT. At first, we weren't sure what this experiment would yield. The set it and forget it model means that there's risk. If people signed up for a program that didn't have set dates like a traditional subscription, would they remember to come? Or would we have to create entire campaigns to remind them that they needed to come to the shows that they had already paid for? The numbers tell a compelling story. Subscribers who weren't ACT Pass members spent about $80 more per year on average, compared to those who only had the ACT Pass. And, of course, those patrons who signed up for a subscription and an ACT Pass, only 7% of ACT's subscribers every year, spent the most on average each year. However, when we look at the number of times a patron attended per year, an interesting pattern emerges. Subscribers attended far less frequently than members, and in fact, patrons who only had an ActPass membership showed up for more shows on average per year than those who had both an ActPass and a subscription. So, if we think of loyalty not just from a dollars and cents standpoint, but around frequency of attendance, the ActPass was creating positive loyalty outcomes for a contemporary theater. The other big concern that TRG and ACT had about this program was that subscribers, who again spend more on average per year and renew at higher rates than ActPass members, might have been seduced by the flexibility and the lower price point of an ActPass membership and would actively downgrade. But what we found is that over 5 years of offering the ActPass membership, the average annual downgrade rate from having both a subscription and a membership into moving into a membership only was just 2%. The other way to think about this is that 98% of patrons who had both a membership and a subscription held on to both. And this rate declined year over year as the patron base settled into the new versioned offerings that ACT made available. Okay, so before you all go and decide that monthly membership programs are great for your organization, keep one important caveat in mind. This is a version that only works if you have a lot of excess capacity and flexibility around dates. If an organization is consistently selling their haul out, or even coming close, a membership can be a tough sell. Think about it from a customer standpoint. If I sign up for the low monthly price and then am unable to redeem my membership because shows are consistently sold out, or I'm only able to get a hold of crappy seats, then I'm much more likely to unsubscribe with a bad taste in my mouth. Bundling is another versioning strategy that organizations often deploy. Unlike a subscription, this is bundling complementary products together. So imagine for the price of your ticket, you get both dinner and a show, or adding the price of parking to the price of a ticket. It's a nice offering, but not something that will typically dramatically improve volume or revenue. On to differential pricing. First, think back to our demand curve exercise. Remember that there is almost always a customer who would have bought if the price was lower and didn't. And there's also almost always a customer who would have paid more for the same product if we had charged them as such. By finding a way to offer both patrons their preferred price, we can maximize both volume and revenue. So differential pricing is a set of strategies that attempts to match that right person up to their right price. One important thing to keep in mind here is that Rafi Mohammed's definition of differential pricing is much narrower than the one that we'll be using in this course. In general practice, differential pricing describes any time we're adjusting price without making dramatic changes to the product. In Mohammed's world, differential pricing is all about targeting the customer based on who they are, what they need, or how they buy, not about anything to do with the product itself. One of the most interesting subjects that differential pricing can help us tackle, and one that's always a conversation point in the field, is the topic of price sensitivity. The 1% windfall provides a very clear, data-oriented approach to measuring and countering price sensitivity. Just like the release of In Rainbows, if we assumed that our customers were price sensitive and just offered everyone a lower price, no holds barred, we would probably lose a lot of money. So Mohammed suggests that we make our customers go through their paces in order to acquire a ticket at a lower price. The number of people who go through a non-zero effort in order to lower their price can give us a measure of how many price-sensitive customers there are out there. Another reminder we keep coming back to is about the standing room only reading from week 1, written by Bernstein. Most of the time, we aren't pricing potential patrons out of a ticket. So, if you're going to create hurdles, it can be a useful activity, especially for a nonprofit with a strong mission orientation. But don't expect that it will lead to much larger number quantity of tickets sold. There are 3 main types of hurdles Mohammed proposes. The first is effort. Just like it sounds, we're going to make our patrons go through some rudimentary effort in order to acquire tickets at a lower price. This can work. I just recently bought new tires for my car and was offered a $50 rebate on my purchase if I took an online survey within a week of buying those tires. You could be sure that I went home and took that survey first thing. The tire store received some valuable information about me in exchange for $50 in lost revenue. Distribution is another hurdle that is proposed and described in the book. While at first glance, it can seem like this only applies to physical products, it's applicable in limited ways in the arts. Many organizations provide savings to patrons who physically come to the box office or who buy online instead of over the phone, as both of these transactions are faster and can help cover costs for the organization. The final hurdle discussed in the book is the time in the sales cycle with which we are in. The theory in the 1% windfall is that early in a sales cycle, there's lots of buzz and excitement, and that people who wait are going to need to be enticed with the lower price. However, we find the opposite to be true in the arts. Think about it. Every day that goes by, we have fewer seats. That means our supply is more limited, which means each seat is more scarce, meaning it's worth more to both us and to the patron. If we encourage patrons to buy late, it means we're taking on a lot of risk. What if the week of the show they forget to buy? Or it rains on the day of the show and they decide to stay home? Or the customer decides to go to the movies instead of to our theater? My personal favorite example of this is from our friends again at Theater Under the Stars in Houston. You'll remember that they didn't see very much price sensitivity in terms of the way that their scale of house was created. Those entry-level tickets weren't selling at high quantities. However, they recently presented Disney's Beauty and the Beast as their holiday blockbuster. They had a large number of performances in their run, and were going to need to do a lot of volume in terms of their tickets in order to meet their goal. So to stimulate early sales, they launched a Christmas in July sale. All of their performances were either buy one, get one free, or buy one, get one half off, depending on their projected demand for each performance. The catch was that customers had only 72 hours to take advantage of this early sale. The numbers speak for themselves. In 3 days, they sold more than $600,000 in ticket revenue and sold more than 8,000 tickets to this long run of the show, securing lots of early reservations that also led them to make data-informed decisions about which performances were going to be in demand and which ones might be a tough sell. Which brings us to that final 20% of dynamic pricing. Remember these definitions from the start of the lecture. Everything we've talked about thus far falls under the bucket of differential pricing, or price discrimination. Dynamic pricing is when we change prices in real time based on what we're seeing happen in demand or supply. This real-time activity requires some advanced planning and groundwork in order to happen in the smartest and most effective way. The best practice for dynamic pricing in arts and culture is to measure the demand for a given performance. So let's say we're running an orchestra company and Beethoven's Fifth on Friday night at 7 p.m. is sold at 65% capacity. The first thing to understand is what demand means for our organization. Are we typically selling our concerts at 90% of capacity, or are we usually 40% sold? What does high demand mean for us? If, let's say, our orchestra typically only sells 50% of the inventory for an average concert, then that means our Beethoven's Fifth concert is in high demand for us, and we should increase prices. Typically, managers will define 2 to 3 triggers that lead to price changes. So, for our imaginary orchestra, let's imagine that our triggers are set at 50%, our average capacity sold, and 60%, which only a small number of our concerts reach. Our Beethoven's Fifth concert, you'll remember, is sold at 65% capacity, which means that it's reached both of these trigger points. In advance, managers should be determining what happens when we hit those triggers. Are we bumping our prices up $2 or $20? Typically, I would say that anywhere between $5 to 10% of the total price of the ticket is an appropriate jump in prices, big enough to have a material impact on our revenue, but small enough that it doesn't scare away potential buyers or create backlash. Finally, there's the all-important question of how it's being managed and by who. Like we've said, dynamic pricing requires lots of real-time data and decision-making. This requires pulls of data from our ticketing system, and then someone to log in and change prices. Usually the ownership of both the decision-making and the implementation is shared across different roles and teams, but advanced planning around this is critical. We'll spend a whole week of this course talking about how to manage pricing up and down across an organization. There is less fear than ever that dynamic pricing will create a backlash. However, just like most business practices, beauty and ethics are in the eye of the beholder. A company called Wasteless has begun adding dynamic price tags to grocery store aisles that assesses the inventory each store has by expiration date and uses pricing to give customers incentive to buy food with a closer expiration. This both maximizes revenue for the grocery store and prevents a massive amount of food waste. Dynamic pricing doing good. On the other end of the spectrum, Kanye West performed at Coachella in 2019, and festival goers who attended his concert were met at the merchandise stand with $225 sweatshirts, $70 t-shirts, and $50 socks. Despite heavy criticism for both the price and the design of the clothing, the merchandise sold out. I would contend that the biggest difference between these two cases are that the managers at Wasteless have created a clear case for why they've made their pricing decisions, and they're using price to drive our behavior. The real truth I'm getting at here is that a cohesive dynamic and differential pricing strategy is like a set of Russian nesting dolls. Taken on their own, they may be well crafted, but it's only when they work together towards a bigger picture that the magic truly happens. So this week for our assignment, we're going to take a break from building the pricing plan for our organizations and take a quiz. This will give you a chance to ensure you fully absorb the concepts of differential versus dynamic pricing. It should be pretty straightforward and a bit lighter lifting considering the reading this week was quite heavy and we're all recovering from our 4th of July weekends. Next week, in week 5, we'll start to tackle differential and dynamic pricing specifically in the arts and create and develop some best practices for your organizations. But between now and then, it's just your reading and the quiz on differential and dynamic pricing. So have a great week and I'll see you in the discussion boards.